The sound of jazz echoed through the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel in Chicago, where the crystal chandeliers cast fractured lights through the martini glass in my hand. Tonight was supposed to be the pinnacle of my career, the IPO celebration party for Altman Keller. I'm Ethan Carter, 35 Regional Marketing Director. I had poured every ounce of sweat into building the perfect media strategy to take this company public on NASDAQ. And yet, standing in the middle of this lavish hall, I felt like nothing more than an outsider. All eyes were on CEO Jonathan Keller, the powerful man in a midnight blue bespoke suit, his salt and pepper hair slicked back with surgical precision, and the razor-sharp gaze of a Wall Street predator. And standing beside him, my wife, Amber, draped in a form-fitting red satin gown, her fair skin glowing under the soft golden lights, those fiery red lips, those piercing eyes, once the very things that captivated me when we first met 8 years ago in Lincoln Park. And now, that same gaze was locked onto Jonathan. They stood far closer than necessary. Jonathan leaned in, whispering something into Amber's ear. His hand rested lightly on her elbow, fingers gliding across her skin with the casual possessiveness of a man who already owned what he touched. Amber didn't pull away. She even smiled, her eyes glittering in complicity. I swallowed hard, my eyes glued to the martini glass. My pulse pounded as if blood vessels inside my skull might burst at any moment. The unease had been creeping in for months, the sudden business trips, the late nights, the calls she'd hastily ended when I walked in. I kept telling myself it was just work stress, but now every piece was clicking into place with disturbing precision. From across the room, I overheard a group of shareholders murmuring, "Did you hear the rumors about Keller and Carter's young wife?" Rumors? I thought he just locked down another hedge fund last week. Oh, he's locking down a lot more than capital. Trust me. The weight in my chest grew heavier. I moved toward the bar, desperate for something stronger, a straight scotch, hoping for a bit of borrowed courage. But then, from the corner of my eye, I caught Jonathan's hand, gently resting on Amber's waist as they quietly slipped away from the main ballroom, heading toward the executive VIP lounge. The impulse hit me harder than my better judgment. Follow them, or spend the rest of my life wondering. I weaved through the sea of laughing guests, slipping into the dimly lit carpeted hallway. The muted yellow lighting threw soft reflections onto the marble walls. My dress shoes echoed eerily as I approached the frosted glass door of the VIP room. Through the blurred glass, I saw their shadows closer than close. Jonathan leaned in, pressing his lips against Amber's temple. She tilted her head back slightly, that faint smile curling on her lips as her hand gently slid down his back. The curtain inside swayed just enough to obscure the details, but not enough to block the stabbing sense of betrayal knifing into my chest. It's probably just a harmless hug, I lied to myself. But I knew better. My legs trembled as I stepped back. Should I walk away, pretend I saw nothing? Hold on to what little dignity I had left? But then the door opened. Jonathan stepped out first. He towered over me, locking eyes with that fake, polished smile I knew too well from boardroom meetings. Ethan. His voice was smooth, warm as always in meetings, but tonight it carried a mocking undertone. The IPO's going well. I hear your marketing team's been working overtime. Amber followed, casually tucking a strand of her dark brown hair behind her ear. Her eyes locked onto mine, not a single trace of guilt or shame. You've got great timing, Ethan. Amber purred, her voice sweet like honey but cold as ice. You're always good at managing campaigns, just never quite good at managing your wife. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Jonathan straightened his cufflinks and tilted his head slightly. Focus on what you can control. Ethan. On Wall Street. Only the strong survive. There they were, my wife. My boss, ripping me apart with nothing more than a few words, each cutting like a blade. I turned and walked away, my legs like lead. But as I dragged myself down that hallway, something inside me shifted. The shock melted into something sharper, colder, deadlier. This won't end here. The next morning, I sat motionless inside the small rental apartment near Navy Pier. What used to be our weekend getaway had now become my home after Amber filed for divorce just last week, forcing me to move out of our suburban house in Naperville. That house used to be our symbol of happiness. The backyard opened onto Lake Michigan, where we grilled barbecue every summer. But now, that house belonged to Amber, thanks to the ruthless legal team Jonathan had lined up for her. She managed to claim nearly everything, even the new SUV that was still in my name. I stared at the scattered divorce papers on the table. The remaining bank balance after the settlement would barely cover a few months of rent, and the job that ended officially yesterday, all of it crumbled in under 48 hours. The blinding white walls made the emptiness inside me feel even starker. My phone vibrated. It was a call from Altman Keller's HR department. I slowly picked up. "Ethan, this is Linda from HR." The syrupy, fake sweet voice rang out. "We're calling to officially confirm your termination due to violations of internal confidentiality policies. The severance package details have been emailed to you. The compensation will be wired within 7 business days. And best of luck in your future endeavors." Cold, robotic. I squeezed the phone so hard my knuckles cracked. Violation of internal confidentiality. Of course, just a convenient excuse for the humiliating takedown Jonathan orchestrated. Just a few weeks ago, I was the one presenting the IPO marketing plan directly to him in the strategy meeting. Now, he had wiped me clean from existence. My LinkedIn was flooded with messages from former co-workers, mostly the obligatory kind, man. Can't believe it. "Hang in there, bro. If you need a referral, I know a few places hiring. The rest, silence. On Wall Street, when you fall, most people just watch. No one wants to get tangled up in an HR scandal days before a massive IPO launch." I sat there numbly, watching CNBC roll financial news across the screen. Jonathan Keller's smug face filled the frame, raising a champagne glass alongside investors, delivering his flashy speech. "This IPO marks a strategic leap for Altman Keller, solidifying our position on Wall Street. We are fully committed to absolute financial transparency." Transparency. My jaw clenched so hard I tasted blood. That arrogant face. And all the dirty secrets I was just beginning to suspect lay behind it. A soft knock at the door. It was Greg, the only person from the company who had come to see me since yesterday. Greg was one of Altman Keller's senior financial analysts, and one of the few who occasionally sent me quiet warnings like, "Watch your back with Jonathan." "You holding up?" he asked softly as he stepped inside. "Let's call it surviving." I let out a hollow laugh, nodding toward the TV screen. "That kind of holding up?" Greg glanced around the barren apartment, then lowered his voice. "I'm not here to pile on. But Ethan, I know some things. About Jonathan, about Amber, and about the Cayman accounts." My eyes narrowed, heart pounding. Cayman Greg nodded, his expression heavy. "Why do you think this IPO suddenly got SEC approval so fast? Jonathan's been funneling money through offshore funds in the Cayman Islands. If you can get solid proof..." "This game isn't over." I sat up straight, my blood surging. "Do you have any proof?" Greg exhaled, pulling a tiny USB drive from his bag. I've been quietly gathering what I could over the past few months. But Ethan, this is dangerous. You need to be absolutely sure before you go down this road. This isn't about your divorce anymore. You'd be going directly after his financial empire." I held the tiny USB in my palm, feeling its weight like the weight of my entire future, caught between fear and a strange surge of adrenaline. Greg looked me in the eye, deadly serious. "What are you planning to do?" I clenched my fist. "I'm going to start exactly where he tried to erase me." For the first time in 2 days of hell, something flickered in my eyes. It wasn't despair, it was resolve. 3 days later, I sat in a small cafe off South Michigan Avenue, an old local joint, the kind you'd never see in the polished social media posts of Chicago's finance crowd or on Amber's Instagram. It was the perfect place to start somewhere no one cared whether I was still Altman Keller's regional marketing director or just another unemployed has-been. In front of me, my old laptop was running through files from the USB Greg had given me. Spreadsheets, transfer reports, internal transactions, all of it looked perfectly clean on the surface. But the deeper I dug, the more something felt off. There were unnamed investment funds that kept showing up: Phoenix Holdings, Mariner Trust, Silver Grove Investment, all with very legitimate-sounding names, but all registered out of the Cayman Islands. Jonathan had quietly siphoned off tens of millions of dollars outside the company's official capital flow. The problem was I couldn't take down an empire like Altman Keller with a few suspicious Excel files. I needed something undeniable. I decided to reach out to an old acquaintance, Blake. Blake used to be one of Altman Keller's internal IT specialists, but quit last year after refusing to get involved in what I now strongly suspected was one of Jonathan's grey area side projects. We met at a dingy old bar in River North. Blake showed up in a faded hoodie, a far cry from his former corporate look. "Been a while, Ethan," he smirked. "I'm guessing you didn't call me just to grab a beer." I slid the USB across the table. "I need to know how Altman Keller's internal servers are encrypted. I suspect the really dirty stuff's buried deeper." Blake let out a dry laugh. "The ghost layer? Huh, oh yeah, it exists. Jonathan keeps that part completely separate. Only his closest circle gets access. What you've got here is just the surface." I nodded. "And I need to get underneath." Blake narrowed his eyes, his voice tense. "You really want to play this game?" "Ethan, this isn't about losing your wife or your job anymore. If you go poking around in offshore funds and money laundering, the FBI might get involved or worse. Whoever's backing Jonathan won't let you walk away." I answered without blinking. "I've already lost everything. What else can he take from me?" Blake paused for several seconds. "Finally." He nodded. "All right, but I'll need someone on the inside to get me a temporary access credential." "Is there anyone at Altman Keller you still trust?" I leaned back, running through the faces of my former colleagues. Marketing was silent. Finance had lined up behind the shareholders. But then, one name surfaced: Olivia Morgan. Olivia, Jonathan's senior executive assistant. Female. 29 sharp, brilliant. Rumors often floated around that she was Jonathan's secret arm candy. But according to Greg, their relationship was far more complicated. I'd known Olivia long enough to know she wasn't easily manipulated. In fact, during several strategy meetings, I'd caught that cold, disgusted look in her eyes every time Jonathan touched her shoulder or grabbed her hand with that faux charming smile. "There might be someone," I said, slowly, "but convincing her will be an entirely different battle." Blake raised an eyebrow. "You got any leverage?" I smiled faintly. This wasn't going to be about persuasion. Olivia had her own reasons to hate Jonathan. I just needed to strike that nerve. 3 days later, I stood outside a swanky rooftop bar in the Loop, where Olivia often came to unwind from work pressure. She arrived exactly as I remembered: sleek navy business dress hugging her frame, wavy brown hair cascading effortlessly, and signature red Louboutin heels cutting through the sea of office workers. Olivia spotted me the moment I stood. "Ethan," she narrowed her eyes, cautious, "you got guts reaching out right after your termination." I smiled, polite but cold, because I know you have very personal reasons to hate Jonathan Keller more than anyone at Altman Keller. Her eyes flickered briefly before returning to a composed calm. "You think you know me that well?" I gently slid an envelope across the table. Inside were copies of emails Greg had quietly gathered, conversations between Jonathan and select investors detailing slush funds hidden in the Caymans, including one thread where Jonathan casually mentioned cleaning up a few troublesome NDA employees. Not hard to figure out Olivia was one of them. For the first time, she lost a bit of composure. She skimmed the pages quickly, biting her lower lip. I lowered my voice. Olivia, you can keep playing the loyal assistant for a few more months, only to get thrown out like the rest of us. Or you can help me drag him straight to hell. She was silent for a long time. The cold in her eyes was gone, replaced by something sharper, like a blade freshly honed. What's your plan, Ethan? I smiled softly. Start with the same financial game he used to crush all of us. For the first time, in those amber eyes of hers, I saw it a flicker of ruthless solidarity. 1 week after that rooftop meeting, we sat across from each other in my makeshift apartment, which had now become our secret command center. The dim glow of the old desk lamp only added to the tension, like we were preparing for an actual war. In front of Olivia was the full money flow diagram Blake and I had reconstructed after days of digging through Altman Keller's ghost layer thanks to the temporary access credentials Olivia had quietly slipped to Blake from Jonathan's internal system. I have to admit, he's a cunning bastard, Olivia murmured, her eyes scanning the sprawling diagram. He set up intermediary offshore accounts, threading them through layers of venture capital funds. On paper, everything looks perfectly clean, I know, I answered. Voice cold. That's why the SEC never caught it. She looked up at me, for the first time, a spark of curiosity in her eyes. So what exactly do you want? Hand everything over to the FBI, blow up the IPO? I shook my head. Not enough? With just these raw files, Jonathan could hire an army of lawyers and spin his way out of it. I want him to step into his own trap. Olivia narrowed her eyes. What kind of dangerous game are you playing? Ethan, I smiled, faintly the kind of smile I'd mastered after 7 years in marketing. I want to create an investment opportunity where White's so irresistible he won't be able to stay away. And once he puts his money in, we control every move. The plan came into focus under the guise of a new venture capital fund called Falcon Equity. We would create a chain of ultra-hot AI startups, exactly the sector Jonathan was desperate to expand into post-IPO. But to create Falcon Equity, we'll need financial records, operating licenses, simulated tech projects, everything convincing enough to fool even the due diligence teams Jonathan will unleash before he invests. Olivia analyzed cautiously. Blake will handle the technical framework. I'll coordinate the marketing optics to make it look flawless. And you, I looked her dead in the eye, you'll be the internal bridge to lure Jonathan in. A rare, razor-sharp smile curled on Olivia's deep red lips. Never thought I'd turn on him like this. I locked eyes with her, more serious than ever. Olivia, he's been using you for years. He forced you to sign that NDA after the Vegas incident last year. It's time he paid for that. Olivia's face stiffened momentarily at the mention of Vegas, but she quickly regained her icy composure. You want me to be the bait? I nodded. Do you know how dangerous he is? Her head tilted slightly, a glint of challenge in her eyes. I do, I replied softly. But this time I'm just as dangerous. The following weeks ran like Swiss clockwork. Blake built a fully functional data simulation for Falcon Equity, complete with meticulously fabricated reports. From a temporary office space in a Silicon Valley startup hub, we crafted the perfect facade. Falcon Equity was positioned as a breakthrough AI investment fund, partnering with cutting-edge startups in cybersecurity and deep learning, the kind of buzzwords no hedge fund could resist. I leveraged my old marketing contacts to seed glowing press releases about Falcon's fake deals on Bloomberg, TechCrunch, and within private investment groups. Within 3 weeks, Falcon Equity went from total unknown to the hottest rising star on the tech map. And, as predicted, Jonathan took notice. Olivia reported back from inside Altman Keller. He's already talking to the investment board about strategic partnerships with Falcon. If you generate a few more enticing reports, I bet he'll approach you directly. I smirked coldly. That's exactly what I'm counting on. 2 months later, Jonathan officially arranged a private meeting between Falcon Equity and Altman Keller at their high-level Chicago headquarters. He had no idea that behind Falcon's advisory team was me, the man he thought he'd already crushed. Walking into the executive boardroom, my heart pounded, but my face remained perfectly calm, a skill honed from years of playing his corporate games. Jonathan entered, his signature sharp grin in place. "Falcon Equity, I've been hearing a lot about you." I locked eyes with him for the first time in months, and I've been watching Altman Keller for quite some time. "Mr. Keller, the real game had officially begun." The closed-door negotiation party ended just before midnight, but I could see it clearly in Jonathan's eyes, barely concealed excitement. He'd taken the bait, exactly as planned. Falcon Equity, our young, emerging venture capital fund, had triggered his hunger for profit. We laid out an irresistible portfolio, a cybersecurity AI project in partnership with the U.S. military, deep learning digital asset analytics for Swiss banks, pre-seed contracts with a major Texas healthcare conglomerate, all fully documented, neatly audited, thanks to Blake's masterfully engineered data trails. And Jonathan, like every other power-hungry predator on Wall Street, couldn't resist the deal of the century as Altman Keller's IPO neared completion. 3 weeks later, he officially submitted an offer. Altman Keller would invest $30 million into Falcon Equity as a long-term strategic partnership, with terms to expand funding post-IPO if everything went smoothly. It was happening faster than even I had anticipated. It was almost unsettling. Blake, speaking over a secure Zoom call from my apartment, voiced his concern. "We've lured him in, but the deeper we pull him, the higher the risk. Are you sure you'll know when to stop?" "I'm not planning to stop." "Blake," I answered calmly. "Jonathan needs to bury himself even deeper." Olivia kept feeding us regular updates from inside Altman Keller. She had become our crucial set of eyes and ears, carefully seductive, just enough to keep Jonathan convinced she was still loyal, but calculated so he wouldn't grow suspicious. New development. Olivia texted one evening. "He's instructed legal to prepare expansion contracts for Falcon after the IPO closes. Total capital commitment could exceed $100 million. I smirked. He was sinking deeper, step by step, entirely unaware that the offshore Cayman accounts, the very roots of his old laundering network, were slowly being exposed as they funneled through his Falcon investments. The key: every transaction was now independently audited, giving the FBI a clean trail whenever it was time to strike. But of course, no plan runs smoothly forever. Late one Friday night, Blake called me in a rush. "Ethan, we've got a problem. Jonathan hired Blackridge private investigators to conduct a quiet background check on Falcon. He's starting to sense something." My grip tightened on the phone. This was the risk point I'd always feared. "Have they found anything yet?" "Not yet, but Blackridge is damn good. A few of our fabricated contracts could raise red flags under heavy scrutiny." I immediately called Olivia. She picked up almost instantly, probably expecting my call. "We're about to get exposed," I said bluntly. "We need to distract Blackridge." She was silent for a few seconds before her voice dropped into a chilling calm. "Leave it to me. I know how to pull his attention away." 2 days later, inside Altman Keller's executive suite, Jonathan invited Olivia for a private dinner at an upscale restaurant along Chicago's Riverwalk, just as he'd done many times before when trying to charm her. But this time, Olivia controlled the conversation, expertly dripping her words like sweet poison. "I truly believe Falcon will be Altman Keller's launchpad to global dominance. And I know you're bold enough to seize this opportunity before outside investors come swarming in. I'm proud to be standing beside you during this historic moment." Her voice was tender, her eyes glistening, her hand lightly grazing his arm again and again with calculated ease. Jonathan, intoxicated by the illusion of control, gradually lowered his guard. Seduction. The weapon Olivia had deliberately withheld throughout this entire operation now became the perfect anesthetic, drawing his focus away from Blackridge. 3 days later. Blake confirmed Blackridge has paused their deeper investigation. Jonathan thinks it was just an overcautious initial review. He's doubling down. When the Falcon equity investments reached $75 million, I knew we were closing in. All that remained was one final post-IPO expansion round, pushing us past $120 million, enough to fully connect Jonathan's offshore laundering network and build an airtight FBI case. Sitting across from me in the apartment, Olivia's eyes flickered with tense energy. "Ethan, are we really about to finish this?" I met her gaze, my voice firm. "No, we're about to start. The real stage is still ahead, right in the middle of the IPO, for the first time." Olivia smiled, a grin laced with both excitement and a hint of wickedness. Exactly. The real curtain hadn't dropped yet. The IPO day finally arrived. Chicago shimmered under the early fall sun, but inside me the sky was grey and taut like a drawn wire. The grand lobby of the NASDAQ headquarters in New York gleamed under brilliant lights as the IPO bell ceremony for Altman Keller prepared to kick off. Behind massive glass walls, hundreds of investors, media outlets, and global financial partners jostled for prime viewing spots to witness this so-called historic leap. Jonathan Keller stood center stage, wrapped in a bespoke tuxedo, grinning like a polished movie star. Standing beside him was the executive leadership team, including Amber. Amber wore a flowing white silk gown, her lips blazing red, just like the first time I met her in Lincoln Park. She stood next to Jonathan with such open, effortless ease, as if their lives had always been entwined, as if there had never been any such thing as ex-husband. I stood in the tech monitoring room backstage, my eyes cold, cutting through the bulletproof glass, exactly as planned. Everything ran perfectly until the very last moment. At 9:29 a.m., just 1 minute before the IPO gavel would strike, Olivia calmly stepped out onto the side platform, approaching Jonathan. "Jonathan, there are a few updated documents you need to sign before we go live." He frowned, annoyed. Right now, Olivia smiled sweetly. "Just a few administrative signatures. Compliance just sent a last-minute update." Inside the thick folder she handed him, along with the familiar fabricated financial documents he had grown comfortable signing over the past months, lay something he didn't know existed: a full reconciliation of Falcon Equity's transaction chain, linked Cayman offshore contracts, and detailed wire transfers through shell accounts entirely orchestrated by him over the past 3 years. Jonathan, intoxicated by his own impending victory, blindly signed, as he always did. And the moment the IPO gavel struck, officially listing Altman Keller on the NASDAQ, I stepped forward with the FBI tactical team. Every eye turned as agents in sharp blue suits stormed the stage, brandishing federal arrest warrants. The lead agent, Special Agent Reeves, declared before live, national cameras, Jonathan Keller for international money laundering, securities fraud, federal tax evasion, and abuse of investment authority. You are hereby under arrest. Camera flashes exploded like machine gun fire. CNBC, Bloomberg, CNN all immediately cut to live coverage. The entire nation watched the most spectacular takedown Wall Street had seen in decades. Jonathan froze. He tried to speak, but couldn't find the words. Amber stood paralyzed beside him, pale and trembling, but it wasn't over. I stepped onto the center stage, face to face with him, under the blaze of hundreds of cameras. "Good morning, Mr. Keller," I said, my voice slicing like a blade. "Your grand financial empire was nothing but a beautifully painted Ponzi scheme. Through gritted teeth," he hissed. "It's you, Ethan." "That's right." I nodded calmly, wearing a relaxed smile for the cameras. How poetic. "Isn't it? The man you tried to crush now watches you stand here in handcuffs." Olivia stepped up beside me, standing tall, her gaze cool and steady as she faced the media, a silent declaration that she was no longer the prey, but the architect of this entire chess game. Amber was escorted away for questioning. She wasn't arrested immediately, But the financial contracts Olivia provided linked her directly to Jonathan's securities fraud operation, making her a co-conspirator. As she was led behind the curtain, I saw it in her eyes, terror and bitterness. She had chosen Jonathan over me, believing power and wealth would keep her forever untouchable. But on Wall Street, the rules are far more brutal than she ever imagined. That evening, the headlines blanketed every screen in America. Biggest IPO scandal of the decade. Explodes on NASDAQ floor. Jonathan Keller arrested in massive international laundering operation. Altman Keller collapses in a single morning, back in Chicago. I sat atop the Peninsula Hotel, a glass of scotch in my hand, looking out over the glittering city, breathing in freedom for the first time after months of living in hell. Olivia sat beside me, resting lightly against my shoulder. In the warm golden light, for the first time, I let myself fully relax. "Ethan," she whispered. "We actually did it. For the first time in months." I smiled, truly smiled. "We've only just begun. Olivia, this is just the beginning." 3 months later, the Chicago Federal Courthouse became the epicenter of national media. Outside, hundreds of reporters crowded under the cold December wind, with media tents lined up like campaign headquarters. Massive banners screamed out the headlines, "Trial of the Century. The Altman Keller Empire Collapses." Jonathan Keller faces historic charges of federal fraud, and money laundering marketing director's ex-wife becomes surprise witness. I sat in the front row, wearing a simple dark grey suit, calmly observing the proceedings. The rage, bitterness, and humiliation that once consumed me had given way to something far colder: victory. In the center of the courtroom, Jonathan Keller sat behind the defendant's stand, hollow-eyed and gaunt. His bright orange prison jumpsuit clashed sharply against the army of elite lawyers he'd paid millions to retain with the scraps of his remaining fortune. Beside him sat Amber, pale and stiff like a wax figure. She had been charged as an accessory to the laundering operation, though her sentence had been reduced for cooperating as a witness. The federal prosecutor rose, his voice commanding as it echoed through the chamber. "Your Honor, the evidence is conclusive. The offshore financial network orchestrated by the defendant over nearly 3 years, operating through the shell of Falcon Equity, constitutes the largest international money laundering scheme in the history of Chicago's IPO market." He pointed directly at Jonathan. "This is not merely money laundering. The defendant engaged in securities fraud, falsified financial reports, deceived global shareholders, manipulated markets, and critically committed sexual misconduct against subordinate employees to suppress witnesses." All eyes turned toward Olivia as the word misconduct rang out. She sat tall at the witness stand, her gaze icy and unflinching as she stared Jonathan down. I vividly remembered the night before the trial opened, when Olivia met me on the rooftop of the Peninsula Hotel, where everything had once begun. "Ethan," she had whispered, "this isn't just for you. It's not even for me. This is for everyone he ever crushed." I looked deep into her amber eyes, where the old fury had been sharpened into something cold and metallic, deadlier than any curse. "Tomorrow, when you sit across from him, Jonathan will learn what it means to have everything stripped away, piece by piece." The judge pounded his gavel 3 times, his voice slicing through the silent courtroom. "Defendant Jonathan Keller is hereby sentenced to 28 years in federal prison without parole, full asset seizure, and permanent ban from participating in any investment, financial, or corporate governance activities within the United States." Camera shutters erupted like gunfire. Jonathan sat, frozen, staring into nothingness, as if his entire world had just imploded. Amber was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison for her role, along with civil penalties that stripped nearly all of her remaining assets. As she was escorted out, her eyes briefly flicked toward me, a glance filled with regret, resentment, and despair. But to me, that moment was long cold and dead. For weeks afterward, the headlines dominated every outlet. Disgraced Wall Street CEO brought down in largest Chicago financial probe. Former victim flips the power game in unprecedented revenge plot. Falcon Equity, of course, had played its role perfectly. Under federal supervision, its full investigation file became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Once its purpose was complete, Falcon was quietly dismantled, leaving no trace behind. 6 months later, I officially launched my own independent financial advisory firm, Carter Strategic Partners, dedicated to supporting small businesses once crushed by corporate giants like Altman Keller. Blake took over as head of data operations, Greg led analytics, and beside me was Olivia, co-founder, and now the woman in my life. We stood side by side at our first financial summit in the Hyatt Regency Chicago ballroom. As the applause rose, I glanced at Olivia and smiled softly. Our new empire is officially underway. Olivia gently squeezed my hand, her gaze firm. But this time, Ethan. We're not building it on sand, I nodded. For the first time after all those months in hell, I felt something Jonathan Keller never truly possessed: freedom, real and forever.